All right, this is ITS164 Networking Fundamentals, CompTIA Network Plus Guide to Networks. Modules 1 through 3, as I have a test on those tomorrow. I might even have a test on Module 8, but people wouldn't shut up. So, all righty. We're going to start off like I have for the last couple module summaries and the self-check questions. All right. Module 1 Introduction to Networking. Network Models. The term physical topology refers to a network's hardware and how devices and cables fit together. Logical topology refers to the way software controls access to network resources and how those resources are shared on the network. A peer to peer network model allows each computer's operating system to control access to its resources without centralized control. Peer-to-peer networks are simple to configure and relatively inexpensive. They are not scalable, not necessarily secure, and not practical for managing more than just a few computers. In a client-server network model, resources are managed by the NOS via a centralized directory database. So the network operating system via a centralized directory database. Common examples of network operating systems include Windows Server 2019, Ubuntu Server, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Ubuntu and Red Hat are versions of Linux. Client-server applications. Resources a network makes available to its users include applications and data, collectively referred to as network services. Network device Network devices use methods and rules for communication known as protocols. Two primary network protocols are TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, and IP, Internet Protocol. And the suite of all the protocols on OS's uses for communication on the network is the TCP IP suite of protocols. The primary protocol used by web servers and browsers clients is HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. When HTTP is layered on top of an encryption protocol such as SSL, Secure Sockets Layer, or TLS Transport Layer Security, the result is HTTPS, HTTP Secure, which gives a secure transmission. An email client uses SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, to send an email message to the first server, which is an SMTP server. The first server sends the message on to the receiver's mail server, which delivers the message to the receiving client using one of two protocols. POP3, Post Office Protocol version 3, or IMAP4, Internet Message Access Protocol version 4. A DBMS, Database Management System, is software that makes requested changes to data and organizes data for viewing, porting, or exporting. Many DBMS, database management systems, use the programming language SQL, structured query language, to configure and interact with the database's objects and data. Popular examples of SQL database software include Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle Database, and the open source MySQL. Network hardware. In a LAN local area network, each node on the network can communicate directly with others on the network. LANs are usually contained in a small space, such as an office or building. A switch connects LAN devices. It receives incoming data from one of its ports and redirects it, or switches it to another port or multiple ports that will send the data to its intended destinations. In a star topology, all devices connect to one central device. In a mesh topology, each device connects to multiple other devices. A network port can be an onboard network port embedded in the computer's motherboard. Another type of port is provided by a NIC. network interface card, also called a network adapter, installed in an expansion slot on the motherboard. A router is a device that manages traffic between two or more networks and can help find the best path for traffic to get from one network to another. In Soho, small office, home office networks, which typically have fewer than 10 computers, a consumer grade router is used to connect a LAN to the internet. An enterprise or industrial grade router can have several network ports, one for each of the networks it connects to. The fundamental difference between a switch and a router is that a switch belongs only to its local network, and a router can belong to two or more networks. Network devices connect to the network to access or provide resources such as a file server, smartphone, smart thermostat, security camera, or network printer. A networking device is a device that enables connections to the network but does not itself provide applications or data for network devices to access. A group of LANs that spread over a wide geographical area is called a WAN, Wide Area Network. A group of connected LANs in the same geographical area is known as a MAN, Metropolitan Area Network, or CAN, Campus Area Network. And these terms might be used interchangeably. WANs and MANs often use different transmission methods and media than LANs. A much smaller network type is a PAN, Personal Area Network, which is a network of personal devices, such as a connection between a smartphone and computer. The 7-layer OSI model. 7-layer OSI, Open Systems Interconnection, reference model was developed to categorize the layers of network communication. Mapping each protocol onto the OSI model helps identify the logistics of which software program or device is initiating and or receiving the protocol or data and how other protocols are related to it. The application layer in the OSI model describes the interface between two applications, each on separate computers. Protocols used at this layer include HTTP, SMTP, POP3, IMAP4, FTP, Telnet, and RDP. The presentation layer is responsible for reformatting, compressing, and or encrypting data in a way that the application on the receiving end can read. The session layer of the OSI model describes how data between applications is synced and recovered if messages don't arrive intact at the receiving application. The application, presentation, and session layers are so intertwined that in practice it's often difficult to distinguish between them. The transport layer is responsible for transporting application layer payloads from one application to another. The two main transport layer protocols are TCP, which guarantees delivery, and UDP, which does not. Transport layer protocols add control information in the area at the beginning of the payload, called the header, to create a message ready to be handed down to the network layer. The process of adding a header to the data inherited from the layer above is called encapsulation. The network layer is responsible for moving messages from one node to another till they reach the destination host. The principal protocol used by the network layer is IP, Internet Protocol. IP adds its own network layer header to the segment of or datagram, and the entire network layer message is now called a packet. The network layer header identifies the sending and receiving hosts by their IP addresses. Layer 2, the data link layer, and layer 1, the physical layer, are responsible for interfacing with the physical hardware on the local network. Example of data link layer protocols are Ethernet and Wi-Fi. Data link layer puts its own control information in the data link layer header that also contains the hardware addresses, the source and destination NICs. It then attaches control information to the end of the packet in a trailer. The entire data link layer message is called a frame. The physical layer sends the frame's bits via a wired or wireless transmission. Safety procedures and policies. A fire suppression system is designed to combat the outbreak of fire and might include the emergency alert system, portable fire extinguishers, an emergency power off switch, and a suppression agent such as foaming chemical gas or water. A fail open policy is often based on common sense to ensure that, in an emergency, no one is harmed when a system is not working. A fail close policy is usually based on the need for security to protect private data or other resources, even if that means access is denied until the emergency is over. An SDS, Safety Data Sheet, formerly called an MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheet, explains how to properly handle substances such as chemical solvents and how to dispose of them. Electrical and tool safety in workplaces is generally regulated by OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is the main federal agency charged with safety and health in the workplace. OSHA regulations for electrical safety require that electrical devices be turned off and the electrical supply locked out before employees work near these devices. Back injury, caused by lifting heavy objects, is one of the most common injuries that happens at work. Don't try to lift an object that is too heavy for you, because there is no exact guidelines for when heavy is too heavy. Use your best judgment as to when to ask for help. Sensitive electronic components can be damaged by ESD, electrostatic discharge, commonly known as static electricity. A discharge of up to 1500 volts of ESD won't produce a visible spark or detectable shock. However, it only takes 10 volts to damage some components. Wear an ESD strap clipped to the computer chassis to eliminate ESD between you and the chassis and its components. Always shut down and unplug a computer before working inside of it. Troubleshooting network problems. As you gather information about the problem, identify the symptoms, question the user, find out what has recently changed, and determine the scope of the problem. Consider multiple approaches to identify the cause, such as working through the layers of the OSI model. Troubleshooters generally follow the bottom to top OSI model by first suspecting and eliminating failed hardware as the cause. Some situations are obviously software related, and it makes more sense to follow the OSI layers top to bottom. Test your theory to assure yourself that you will indeed solve the problem before you implement the solution, and then determine the next steps needed. If your test proves your theory is wrong, move on to another guess or escalate the problem. Before you implement a fix, consider the scope of your change, especially how it will affect users, their applications, and their data. Check with your organization's policies to determine whether the proposed change falls under the change management requirements. Before you make the change, be sure to alert all affected users in advance. Create backups of software and data as needed, and save or write down current settings before you change them. Test your solution thoroughly and clean up after yourself when you're finished. For complex problems, you might need to escalate the problem to someone with access to more technical resources or with more authority to test or implement a solution. Test the system for full system functionality. Also consider what you can do to make sure the problem doesn't reappear. Document problems and their resolutions, lessons learned, and unique or insightful solutions to problems in your company's call tracking system and knowledge base. All right, we're going to go to the self check questions for Module 1 Introduction to Networking. Network models. Which of the following is part of a network's physical topology? Answer B. A printer plugged into a nearby desktop computer. Physical topology mostly refers to a network's hardware and how computers' other devices, such as printers and cables or radio signals, work together to form the physical network. Operating systems, passwords, and file permission settings are all part of a network's logical topology. Which of the following is an advantage of P2P file sharing? Inexpensive. Peer-to-peer networks are often less expensive to set up and maintain than other types of network. A network operating system, such as Windows Server 2019, is much more expensive than a desktop operating system, such as Windows 10. P2P networks are not scalable and not necessarily secure. Client server networks store user accounts and passwords in one place, and access permissions are centrally granted. What Windows Server group must clients join to access network resources in a client server network? Domain. When Windows Server controls network access to a group of computers, this logical group is called a Windows domain. A workgroup is one option for sharing resources in a peer to peer network. A server might use a RAID, redundant array of independent disks, configuration of hard drives, so that if one hard drive fails, another hard drive automatically takes its place. Client server applications. Which of the following is a secure protocol? SSH. The SSH Secure Shell Protocol creates an encrypted channel or tunnel between two computers, which provides security that Telnet lacks. HTTP Hypertext Transfer Protocol requires another protocol, such as TLS Transport Layer Security, for security. FTP File Transfer Protocol does not support encryption and is therefore not secure. However, an encrypted and secure file transfer protocol is SFTP, Secure File Transfer Protocol, which is based on the SSH protocol. What is an example of an open source DBMS? MySQL. Popular examples of SQL databases include Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle Database, and the open source MySQL. Open source is the term for software whose code is publicly available for use and modification, which is often considered more secure because users can evaluate the source code of the software to ensure that there are no loopholes left open for attackers to exploit. Note that open source is not synonymous with free. Which of these protocols would not be used to access a server in a nearby building? TLS. TLS, Transport Layer Security, adds encryption to other protocols such as HTTP, but does not provide remote access to a computer. The Telnet protocol is a command line application included in many operating systems that allows a user to remote into a computer. Although its transmissions are not encrypted, the SSH, Secure Shell Protocol, creates an encrypted channel or tunnel between two computers, which provides security that Telnet lacks. In Windows operating system, RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, also provides secure encrypted transmissions. Network hardware. When you connect your keyboard, mouse, and monitor to your computer, what kind of network topology are you using? Star topology. Explanation. In a star topology, all devices connect to one central device. In this case, the keyboard, mouse, and monitor are connected to the central device, the computer. In a bus topology, the devices would be connected in a line with no device connected to more than two other devices. In a mesh topology, all devices would be connected to each other. In a ring topology, each device would be connected to exactly two other devices. Which networking device is best for connecting your network printer to three computers? A switch. A switch receives incoming data from one of its ports and redirects or switches it to another port or multiple ports that will send the data to its intended destinations. The fundamental difference between a switch and a router is that a switch belongs only to its local network, and a router belongs to two or more networks. In this case, all the devices belong to the same network. While a hub would work, it's inefficient and outdated, so as not the best choice. A file server stores files for other computers to access. Which network types can your smartphone use? A WAN, a LAN, and a PAN. When a smartphone communicates over the cellular network for phone calls, it is using a WAN, a wide access network, across a wide geographical area. When a smartphone connects with your home network, it is using a LAN, a local area network in your home. When a smartphone connects with Bluetooth earbuds, a fitness tracker, or a Bluetooth weight scale, it is using a PAN, a personal area network, to connect devices intended for use by one person at a time. The 7-layer OSI model. At what OSI layer does your browser's web page request begin its journey through the OSI layers? 7. The application layer. The application layer in the OSI model describes the interface between two applications, each on separate computers. It takes data from an application or utility and creates a payload for lower OSI layers to manage and transport. The lower layers, such as the network, data link, and physical layers, encapsulate the payload from higher layers to add each protocol's information before passing the message down to the next layer. Which layer holds the address of the target application running on the destination computer? The transport layer. The transport layer header addresses the receiving application by a number called a port, which identifies a specific application on a computer. The application layer does not include addressing information. The network layer header identifies the sending and receiving host computers on a network by their IP addresses. The data link frame header contains the hardware addresses of the source and destination NICs. This address is called a MAC, a Media Access Control Address, which OSI layer adds both a header and a trailer. Data link layer. The data link layer puts its control information in the data link layer header and also attaches control information to the end of the packet in a trailer. The entire data link layer message is then called a frame. Transport and network layers both add their information in their respective headers, but typically do not use trailers, which, while there is a preamble added in front of the data link layer header, is not typically considered to be a physical layer header. The physical layer is responsible for sending bits via wired or wireless transmission. Safety protocol and policies. Which fire suppression level provides the most targeted protection? Rack level. Rack level fire suppression offers targeted fire detection and suppression inside each cabinet that holds network devices to reduce the impact surrounding equipment. Room level fire suppression incorporate a sprinkler or gas system that provides fire suppression in parts of a room or throughout the entire room. A building level system protects the entire building and employees throughout that space. What is the minimum amount of ESD required to damage sensitive electronic equipment? 10 volts. When your body and a component have different static charges and you touch the component, you can discharge up to 1500 volts of static electricity without seeing a spark or feeling the discharge. However, it only takes 10 volts to damage the component. This means you could fry a motherboard and never even feel a shock. Troubleshooting network problems. What should you do after making a plan to solve a problem and carrying out your plan? Verify functionality. After implementing your solution, you'll test the system to verify full system functionality. It's also a good idea to return a few days later and make sure all is working as you expected. Also consider what you can do to make sure the problem doesn't reappear. You find out what has recently changed at the beginning of the process. You test your theory of what's causing the problem before developing a plan to solve the problem. You document your work at the end after verifying the solution worked. And the last one. While exploring the problem and developing a theory about the cause, where can you go to get information on similar problems your coworkers have faced in the past? The knowledge base. A knowledge base is a collection of accumulated insights and solutions to the problems encountered on a particular network. A SDS safety data sheet explains how to properly handle substances such as chemical solvents and how to dispose of them. The current troubleshooting ticket in the call tracking system will contain information about the current problem, but not accumulated insights from previous problems. An instruction manual can provide insights on how a device or application works and possibly troubleshooting help for common problems, but it will not include information on previous problems experienced by your coworkers. Module 2, Infrastructure and Documentation. Module Summary. Components of Structured Cable. The ANSI TIA 568 structured cabling standards describe uniform enterprise-wide cabling systems regardless of who manufactures or sells the various parts used in the system. For most situations, the device that marks where the ISP's network ends and the organization network begins is the DMARC, or demarcation point. Connections branching out from the MDF may include main distribution frame, include Ethernet cables connecting to nearby work areas, large cables running to IDFs, independent, yeah, independent distribution frames, in other buildings or on other floors of the same building, and the incoming connection from the service provider's facility. VoIP, voice over IP, also known as IP telephony, is the use of any network, either public or private, to carry voice signals using TCP/IP protocols. A voice gateway device converts signals from a campus's analog phone equipment into IP data that can travel over the internet, or it converts VoIP data from an internal IP network to travel over a phone company's analog telephone lines. A common application layer protocol used by voice gateways to initiate and maintain connections is the signaling protocol SIP, Session Initial Protocol. Cable management best practices include minimizing exposed wires at each termination, ensuring continuity, loosely cinching cables, covering cables, organizing cables with a cable trays and conduits, reducing cable exposure to EMI, electromagnetic interference, and keeping good documentation. HVAC sensors are often connected as network devices themselves. These HVAC sensors are an example of an industrial control system, also called SCADA, SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. Other SCADA systems with sensors connected to the network might be monitoring electric utilities, water, and sewage, traffic signals, mass transit, manufacturing equipment, refrigeration units, or lighting and entry systems. Security cameras are also connected as networked devices, although typically security cameras are isolated in a secure network segment. Network documentation. Network diagrams are graphical representations of a network's devices and connections. These diagrams may show local topology, IP address reserves, names of major network devices, types of transmission media, and physical layouts such as a floor plan or rack diagram. A network diagram is often the product of network mapping, which is the process of discovering and identifying the device on a network. One of the simpler and most popular tools is Nmap, Network Mapper. A wiring diagram is a geographical representation of a network's wired infrastructure. In its most detailed form, it shows every wire necessary to interconnect network devices and the location of those wires. A rack diagram shows the devices stacked in a rack system and is typically drawn to scale. Rack diagrams are helpful when planning a rack installation or when troubleshooting equipment installed in a rack. Essential network documentation covers logical and physical connections on a network. Inventory management, IP address utilization, vendors such as contact information, warranty information, service agreements, and troubleshooting instructions, and internal operating procedures, policies, and standards. For example, many corporations establish SOPs, standard operating procedures, to ensure consistency as different employees perform the same complex tasks. A baseline configuration of network devices and their software is a change management concept that defines a stable state to be achieved and maintained before attempting future changes. The process of designing, implementing, and maintaining an entire network is called the system life cycle. A major part of this process is the removal and disposal of outdated assets and the addition of compatible updated devices. The term inventory management refers to the monitoring and maintaining of all the assets that make up a network. Systematically name and label network devices and connections. A good naming convention can serve double duty by including essential information about each device while also allowing technicians to identify and track each device more easily. Important business documents in network administration include the MOU and the SLA. An MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, documents the intentions of two or more parties to enter into a binding agreement or contract, and is sometimes used be- between an informal handshake and the legally binding signatures on contracts. An SLA, service level agreement, is a legally binding contract or part of a contract that defines in plain language and in measurable terms the aspects of a service provided to a customer. Change management. Four common types of software changes include installations, patch management, software upgrades, rollbacks after a failed change. Hardware changes might include adding new equipment or replacing old equipment. Hardware changes might also include updates. Good firmware management requires that you source the update directly from the manufacturer. Confirm you're applying exactly the correct update. Carefully test the update before deploying and again after deploying. And fully document any effects on the network. Balance the risks with the potential benefits, especially if the update includes security enhancements that close critical vulnerabilities. Required change management processes and related documentation are designed to protect the person making the change, users, managers, and the organization so that changes don't unnecessarily disrupt normal workflow or put undue responsibility for a problem on any one person. Change management steps require a change request document, an approval process, project management, and documentation. The change coordinator is a trained project manager responsible for overseeing all aspects of the change, including user training, coordination between departments involved in the change, documenting how and when notification of the change will happen, negotiating with users, management, and the IT department regarding the authorized downtime for the change to happen, communicating with management regarding any unforeseen problems that arise during the change, and managing the budget for the change. Solutions to the self check problems from Module 2 infrastructure and documentation. At what point does the ISP hand over responsibility to the customer? DMARC. For most situations, the device that marks where a telecommunications service provider's network ends and the organization network begins is the DMARC, or demarcation point. The MDF, main distribution frame, and the IDF, intermediate distribution frame, are environmentally controlled spaces holding network equipment. While the DMARC might be located inside the MDF, the DMARC itself is the cutoff point of responsibility. A patch panel is a panel of data receptors which can be mounted to a wall or a rack, which provides a central termination point when many patch cables converge in a single location. According to structured cabling standards, there must be at least one link on each floor. IDF. The ANSI PIA standard specifies at least one IDF intermediate distribution frame per floor, although large organizations may have several data rooms or closets per floor to better manage the data feed from the main data facilities. There is only one MDF, main distribution frame, per campus and one DMARC per ISP, Internet Service Provider. There can be none, one, or several work areas per floor, and the numbers of work areas is not defined by structured cabling standards. Which of the following causes physical layer failures? EMI. Install cable at least 3 feet away from fluorescent lights or other sources of EMI, electromagnetic interference, to reduce the possibility of noise interference that can affect your network signals at the physical layer. A SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition system, acquires real-time data from a physical system and manages the system, or presents the data to humans to monitor and manage the system. Regular twisted pair cables are coated with PVC, polyvinyl chloride, which is made from a cheap plastic that is toxic when burned. STP, shielded twisted pair cable, is a copper-based cable containing twisted pair wires with metallic shielding, such as foil around each wire pair or surrounding all 4 wire pairs. Network documentation. Which network diagram shows a logical topology? A network map. Network mapping is the process of discovering and identifying the devices on a network. A network's map shows logical connections and addressing information. Diagrams of physical layouts include floor plans, rack diagrams, and wiring diagrams. In which life cycle phase is an old device removed from the network? Implementation. During the implementation phase of a system's life cycle, you deploy new equipment to replace old equipment and continue testing to achieve a new stable baseline. Removing old equipment during normal maintenance, evaluation, or analysis of requirements would leave a gap in the network topology. When the internet goes down, what business document defines a customer's options for paying a reduced rate? SLA. A SLA, service level agreement, specifies options for compensation if outages exceed defined thresholds. An MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, documents the intentions of 2 or more parties to enter into a binding agreement. An SOW, Statement of Work, documents in detail the work that must be completed for a particular project. An RFP, Request for Proposal, is a request for vendors to submit a proposal for a product or service your company wants to purchase. Change management. Which change is designed to close a security vulnerability without affecting other components of an application? A patch. A software patch is a correction, improvement, or enhancement to software. It corrects a bug, closes a vulnerability, or adds minor enhancements to only part of the software, leaving most of the code untouched. A software rollback is the process of reverting to a previous version of software after attempting to patch or upgrade it. A software upgrade is a major change to a software package that enhances the functionality and features of the software while also correcting bugs and vulnerabilities. New software is installed on a device. Which change management principle must you apply to all changes regardless of scope or impact? Document the change. Some change management principles apply to any type of change, including the requirement to document each change throughout the process. More extensive or expensive changes must progress through a formal change management process, which includes submitting to a well, which includes submitting a change request document and acquiring review board approval. Patches or upgrades should always be thoroughly tested and planned, although updates that close a critical security vulnerability should be prioritized and applied as soon as reasonably possible. All right, and we are already at Module 3. Thankfully, before my throat gives up. Module 3, Addressing. Addressing Overview. Addressing methods operate in the data link network, transport, and application layers of the OSI model. A MAC address is embedded on every NIC on the globe and is assumed to be unique to that NIC. The IP address is assigned to nearly every interface and can be used to find any computer in the world if the IP address is public on the internet. A port is a number used by the transport layer to identify one application among several that might be running on a host. Every host on the network is assigned a unique character based name called a FQDN, fully qualified domain name, consisting of a host name and a domain name. MAC addresses contain two parts, are 48 bits long, and are written as hexadecimal numbers separated by colons. The first 24 bits, 6 hex characters, are known as the OUI, or Organizationally Unique Identifier, which identifies the NIC's manufacturer. The last 24 bits make up the extension head identifier or device ID and identify the device itself. IP addresses. You can permanently assign a static IP address to a device, or you can configure the device to request and receive, or lease, a dynamic IP address from a DHCP server each time it connects to the network. A DHCP dynamic host configuration protocol server manages the dynamic distribution of IP addresses to devices on a network. A network technicians need to be comfortable with the CLI command line interface because it is quicker and often more powerful and flexible than a GUI, graphical user interface. A subnet mask indicates what portion of an IP address is the network portion, called the network ID or network address, and what part is the host portion, called the host ID or node ID. When using classful addressing, which is an older method of managing IP address ranges, the dividing line between the network and host portions is determined by the numerical range the IP address falls in. In contrast to classful addressing, classless addressing allows the dividing line between the network and the host portions to fall anywhere along the string of binary bits in an IP address. Moving. Oh, no. Random button press. Sorry about that. Moving this dividing line allows for segmenting networks within networks in a process called subnetting. Class A, 1 to 126 of the first octet. Class B, 128 to 191.255.255.255, and Class C 192 to 223.255.255.255. Addresses for the most part can be used to connect and access internet resources. Class D begins with the octets 224 through 239, and Class E begins with 240 through 254. IP addresses are not available for general use. To conserve its public IP addresses, a company can instead use private IP addresses for devices on its private networks. That is, devices that do not directly connect to the internet, but instead communicate through a representative device such as a router. These addresses were set aside for private use by IANA's FRC 1918 Request for Comment 1918 document released in 1996. A broadcast message is read by every node on the network. A LAN, which consists of all the nodes a broadcast reaches, can be referred to as a broadcast domain. Routers don't forward broadcast messages, thus creating a boundary for a LAN. A DHCP scope or DHCP pool defines a range of IP addresses to be assigned to clients when they request an address. Other scope options include eliminating the lease time and identifying the default gateway and DNS servers. When private devices need access to other networks or the internet, a public facing gateway, such as a router or firewall, substitutes the private IP addresses used by computers on the private network with its own IP address. This process is called NAT, Network Address Translation. Besides requiring only a single public IP address for the entire private network, another advantage for NAT is security. The gateway hides the entire private network behind this one address. IPv6 offers a lot more public IP addresses than does IPv4 and also provides improvements to routing capabilities and speed of communication. In IPv6, a link, sometimes called the local link, is any LAN bounded by routers. Bounded by routers. Neighbors are two or more nodes on the same link. IPv6 supports three types of IP addresses, classified by how the address is used: unicast address, including global address, local link address, and loopback address; multicast address; and anycast address. IPv6 reduces network traffic by eliminating broadcasting. IPv6 addresses uses a process called SLAAC, stateless address auto-configuration, so that a computer can auto-configure its own local IP address without the help of a DHCP-v6 server. After generating an IPv6 address and confirming the address is unique on the network, the computer asks if a router on the network can provide configuration information. This message is called an RS, router solicitation message. If a router responds with DHCP information in what's called an RA, router advertisement message, the computer uses whatever information this might be, such as the IP addresses of DNS servers or the private network of the network prefix. We'll get it. Ports and sockets. A port is a number assigned to a process, such as an application or a service that can receive data. Whereas an IP address is used to find a computer, a port is used to find a process running on that computer. A socket consists of both a host's IP address and a process's TCP or UDP port, with a colon separating the two values. Well-known ports range from 0 to 1023 and are assigned by IANA to widely used and well-known utilities and applications. Registered ports range from 1024 to 49151, can be used temporarily by processes for non-standard assignments to increase to increase security. Dynamic and private ports range from 49152 to 65535 and are open for use without restriction. Which port a protocol communicates over becomes especially relevant when configuring firewalls. A firewall works by blocking traffic on all ports except those that are specifically approved by the network admin. Domain names and DNS. Name resolution is the process of discovering the IP address on a host of a host when its FQDN is known. An authoritative name server is the authority on computer names and their IP addresses for computers in their domains. The domains an organization is responsible for managing are called a DNS zone. Domain name system, DNS, associates computer names with IP addresses. DNS namespace database are stored on thousands of servers around the world, rather than being centralized on a single server or group of servers. The primary DNS server holds the authoritative DNS database for the organization's zones. When a secondary DNS server needs to update its database, it makes the request to the primary server for the update. This update process is called a zone transfer. A caching DNS server accesses public DNS data and caches the DNS information it collects. This server receives DNS queries from local network clients and works to resolve them by contacting other DNS servers for information. Caching DNS servers do not store zone files, which is why they must rely on their caches and resolution efforts. DNS name servers are organized in a global hierarch- ah, hierarchical structure. At the root level, 13 clusters of root DNS servers hold information used to locate the TLD, top level domain servers. These TLD servers hold information about the authoritative servers owned by various organizations. There are two types of DNS requests: recursive lookups, which demand a resolution or the answer that the information can't be found, and iterative lookups, which do not demand resolution and only provide information if the server already has it. Namespace databases are stored in DNS zone files, which are simple text files consisting of resource records that each store specific kinds of information about the zone. These records consist of fields specific to the kind of information that record type should hold, such as the zone name, class, these days that's always internet class, and record type. Other fields in each record vary accordingly to the purpose of that record. Troubleshooting address problems. The ping packet internet grouper utility is used to verify that TCP/IP is installed, bound to the NIC, configured correctly, and communicating with the network. The ping utility starts by sending out a signal called an echo request to another computer, which is simply a request for a response. The other computer then responds to the request in the form of an echo reply. The protocol used by the echo request and the echo reply is ICMP, Internet Control Message Protocol, a lightweight protocol used to carry error messages and information about a network. The ipconfig command shows current TCP IP addressing and domain name information on a Windows computer. You can also use ipconfig to change some of these settings. On Unix and Linux systems, use the IP utility to view and manage TCP IP settings. As with ipconfig on Windows, any IP commands that change the state of a link require elevated privileges. In Linux and Unix systems, this is accomplished by logging in as the root user or by temporarily elevating the current user's privileges with the sudo superuser command. Also, any changes to link configurations are not saved by default. They will be lost upon the next restart unless the configuration changes are added to a startup script or edits are made to underlying configuration files. Similar to IP, use the ipconfig utility to view and manage TCP/IP settings on Unix and Linux systems. The if config utility has been depreciated in many Linux distributions, including Ubuntu. This means it's not installed by default, and users are intended to use the IP command instead. However, you can install it by running the command sudo apt install net-tools. The hostname utility offers very basic commands used to display a device host name, either in Windows, Unix, or Linux systems. In Windows, hostname has no additional parameters. In Unix or Linux, hostname offers a few more options, including the ability to change the computer's name. The NSLOOKUP namespace lookup utility allows you to query the DNS database from any computer on the network and find the host name of a device by specifying its IP address or vice versa. This is useful for verifying that a host is configured correctly or for troubleshooting DNS resolution problems. The DIG domain information grouper utility is available on Linux and Mac OS and provides more detailed domain information than NSLOOKUP. It's installed by default on Ubuntu. You can install DIG on other distributions with the command apt space get, well, apt space dash get space install space DNS utilities. Use dig to query DNS name servers for information about host addresses and other DNS records. While not a command line tool, an IP scanner can be used to gather information about all devices connected to a network, including host names, manufacturer names, operating systems, IP addresses, MAC addresses, interfaces used, and open ports with running services. Sophisticated IP scanners can help detect and manage large numbers of devices throughout a complex network. And self-check questions for Module 3 Addressing overview. What numbering system do humans use to write MAC addresses? Hexadecimal. A MAC address is 48 bits, written in as 6 hexadecimal numbers separated by colons, as in 0060 8C 005499. A hexadecimal number, also called a hex number, is a number written in the base 16 number system, which uses the 16 numerals 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. So 0 through 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. IPv4 addresses are written as 4 decimal numbers called octets. For example, 92.106.50.200. Each octet, when written in binary, consists of exactly 8 bits. A binary number is a number written in the base 2 number system, which only uses the numerals 0 and 1. What Windows command outputs a computer's MAC address? Answer is C. ipconfig space dash all. Exclamation. In a PowerShell or command prompt window, you can enter ipconfig/all to identify your NIC's MAC address. The ipconfig command without the /all parameter will not show the MAC address. The ping command is used to check connectivity between two devices. OUI lookup is not a standard Windows command. IP addresses. What command shows you a computer's TCP/IP configuration? ipconfig. You can find TCP/IP configuration information and more using the ipconfig command. The ping command is used to check connectivity between two devices. The SSH command creates an encrypted channel or tunnel between two computers. Nmap is a simple and popular command line utility used to detect network devices. Which of the following IPv4 addresses is a public IP address? D. 64.233.177.189. IP addresses within the range 10 through 10.255.255.255, 172.16.0.0 through 172.31.255.255, and 192.168.0.0 through 192.168.255.255 are RFC 1918 or private IP addresses. The address 64.233.177.189 is a public IP address and goes to one of Google's servers as a Class A address. Which IPv6 prefix can be routed on the internet? Answer A. 2000 --3. Global IPv6 addresses can be routed on the internet, often begin with the prefix 2000 /3, although other prefixes are being released. Link local addresses begin with FE80/10. The loopback address is written ..1/128. Many unique local Unicast addresses begin with FC00/7. Ports and sockets. When hosting a secure email server for access from the internet, which port should be open on the corporate firewall? 587. SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, is used to send mail messages to and between email services. The old port for SMTP is 25, but encrypted transmissions to an SMTP server use port 587. Port 110 is the non-secure port for POP3, which is another email protocol. Port 443 is the secure port for encrypted HTTP, otherwise known as HTTPS. So that is 587 for SMTP. That is port 110 for non-secure POP3 and port 443 for SMTP. Which port should be open so you can remote into the corporate office's Linux server from a branch office? 22. In Linux operating systems, SSH Secure Shell provides secure encrypted remote access and works over port 22. Port 3389 serves RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, on Windows systems. Port 23 supports the unsecure Telnet. Port 1433 supports communications with Microsoft SQL Server. Domain names and DNS. When your computer requests a DNS lookup, which DNS server holds the most reliable information for that DNS record? The primary DNS server. The primary DNS server is the authoritative name server for the organization, which holds the authoritative DNS database for the organization's zones. The caching DNS server and forwarding DNS server might contain needed DNS information in their cache, but this information could potentially be outdated. Root DNS servers play a role in DNS resolution by holding information used to locate the TLD, top-level domain servers. These TLD servers hold information about the authoritative servers owned by various organizations. Which DNS record type is listed first in a zone file? The SOA. The start of authority, the SOA, Record is listed at the beginning of the zone file and gives important information about the zone, such as a contact email address, when the zone was last updated, how long the zone information is valid until it should be refreshed, and necessary information on how to perform a zone transfer. A address records, AAAA address for IPv6 records, and CNAME, canonical name, records are placed later in the zone file and provide mapping information. Which DNS record type is used to find an FQDN from a given IP address? PTR. A PTR pointer record is used for reverse lookups to provide a host name when you know an IP address. A address records find IPv4 addresses when the host name is known. CNAME, canonical name records, hold alternative names for a host. An MX, mail exchange record, identifies an email server. Troubleshooting address problems. What protocol does ping use? ICMP. The protocol used by the ping echo request and echo delay is ICMP, Internet Control Message Protocol, a lightweight protocol used to carry error messages and information about a network. HTTP is used for communication with web servers. DHCP is used to dynamically assign IP addresses on a network. FTP is a file transfer protocol. Which command disables a computer's connection to the network? ipconfig/release. The ipconfig/release command releases the IP address when dynamic IP addressing is being used. Releasing the IP address effectively disables the computer's communication with the network until a new IP address is assigned. The sudo IP link set ETH0 up command brings the Ethernet 0 interface to an up state. The sudo hostname test VM command sets a new hostname on a device. The ping localhost command pings the loopback address on a device. What problem will ping Google what problem will ping google.com check for that ping 8.8.8.8 will not? Name resolution issues. Pinging a hostname using its hostname can verify you have internet access and functioning name resolution DNS services because the hostname must first be resolved before the host can be located and pinged. Pinging any device outside your network will check default gateway configuration, even if you ping its address instead of its hostname. Pinging a target's hostname or IP address will not determine whether you're using the correct DNS server. DHCP scope and exhaustion is not determined with the ping command. Oh my! That is everything from the first three chapters. I'm now going to go over some notes that my professor, Dr. Phil, gave us on it. So the first 24 characters of a Mac identify the manufacturer. The last 24 identifies the device, and that is unique. So first 24 manufacturer, last 24 that specific device. IPv4 ranges. So class A is 1 to 126 in that first octet. That's class A. Class B is 128 through 191 at its extreme end. Class C is 192 to 223. So 1 to 126. 127 is a loopback address. So you put anything you want into 127 dot whatever you feel like. It will only ping yourself. 128 through 191 at its extremist is a Class B network. 192 through 223 is a Class C. Understand and know subnets for each class. So Class A's will have 255 for the first octet. Class B will have 255 for the first two octets. And Class C will have 255 for the first three octets. Private IPs to be aware of. There is a Class A private IP, which is 10.0 or 10 dot. And then the Class C private IP range is 192.168. Continuing. Let's see. Private IP. Layer 2 is talked about on the Mac. So, presentate. All people seem to like Domino's Pizza. So, uh, data link layer. Oh, can't think. Layer 2 is Mac. Layer 3 is IP. Layer 4, TCP, UDP ports. That's network. Seem to need Domino's Pizza, data link, presentation. Memorize three ports and service. So port 80, HTTP. Port 25, SMTP, secure mail transfer protocol. Port 3389, remote desktop protocol. Port 80, HTTP. Port 25, SMTP. Port 3389, remote desktop protocol, RDP. So a couple of layer 7 protocols are HTTP, SMTP, HTTPS, POP3, RDP. Loopback is 127. Um, let's see, default DHCP IP Windows Server for IP allocation is 169.254.20.2. 169.254.20.2. Default IPv6 address is FE80. Default global address, link local address, unique address is 2000. FC00 is a unique local address. Um, 802.IQ, how VLANs and switches interact with info. Question 10's answer is going to be B as in Bravo. Question 10 is B as in Bravo. Let's see. 10.0.0.0 has 24 bits for hosts. So it's 10 dot and 0 to 255 amongst all three octets. -2 for each octet. Because you have to. No, you don't need to. You don't need to. Just -2 in the very last one. So that's a lot of hosts. Let's see. I need to be able to do 3 subnets, one in each class. So A, B, and C. And tell how many subnets can be in each one. Subnet / notation. wants the first three and the last three. Um, application protocols, the at transport layer, the ports, IP config shows IP config. IPconfig slash all shows all TCP IP config information as well as MAC address. And that's that.